Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dynasty Fantasy Football Central podcast. I'm Michael Moore. He's Jonathan Scott. Say hello, Jonathan.
What's going on, people?
Tonight, I think we're going to do our first rookie mock draft. It's not our first for the site, which is dynastyfantasyfootballcentral.com, but it's our first live and on the air, and pretty much it's on record for what we did, so we can't change it. So if we end up picking a player that was already taken, or if we just take someone that's a complete reach, it's now for everyone to see. Isn't that right, Jonathan?
It's on the internet, and the internet's forever. Yeah.
Yeah. So without further ado, just some details on the draft that we're going to do tonight. We're going to assume it's a 12-team PPR league. No special scoring, no special rules on catches or anything like that. We'll do offensive only for the mock draft, but then after we're done, we'll sort of dive into a couple of IDP players if you played an IDP Dynasty League. So, Jonathan, I think we have you going first because you actually have 3 in our actual mock draft. With the first pick, who do you have?
I would fully expect that every draft you're in, this should not be complicated, regardless of fit. And if someone's drafting first overall and thinking about fit, trade with them as much as possible. It's got to be Sammy Watkins, right? Like, there can't be another option here. If you have special scoring even towards certain players or something like that, it's still got to be Watkins. I don't know if you saw the YouTube video of his first or second day in training camp where he comes out of a cut, almost falls flat on his face, and gets up in mid-stride and plucks one first thing and get out of the air.
Yeah, I did. It was awesome.
That was awesome. That's the kind of talent you're talking about with this kid. The only knock, like literally the only knock you have, I think I saw a stat the other day that said of the people that scored 10 or plus touchdowns in the NFL last year, like 80-something% were over 6'2", and he's not a tall guy. But I mean, if that's the stat you're using to justifying not taking the best player in the draft, Godspeed, man. That's not how you do things. So don't overthink it. Don't go Ebron. Don't go Evans. Don't go with a limited running back like Sankey or Hyde. Go with Watkins. You'll be happy for 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, everything adds up to him being the first player. I mean, he's the number one receiving option on that team. He obviously has the athletic ability. Is probably the best, I mean, just prospect in general amongst all the rookies this year. So when you put those two together, situation and his talent, yeah, I don't know how you go anywhere else. Now, that's not to guarantee he's going to be like a Hall of Famer and he's going to make Pro Bowls every year, but I think if you're looking for the safe choice, that's a pretty good choice to have, I would say.
Yeah, just don't overcomplicate it. Like, so much. It's so cliche to say we're a bunch of nerds sitting around computers or whatever, filling the cliche here. But just like in real life, if you mess up your first-round pick or your second-round pick, you're kind of, I mean, that's the pick you can't mess up. So take the guy that even the draft people say is a great person, that everyone agrees is a great person, just move on.
Yeah, I don't think there's any argument there. All right, so with the second pick, yeah, again, not too much thought is going into this. You got to take Mike Evans just because. Look, if there was anyone to challenge Sammy Watkins, athletically speaking, it would probably be Mike Evans. I mean, he's just a beast, and he does fulfill that requirement of the 6'2" and above. If you're looking at the touchdown number, yeah, he's just a freak, man. And the other good thing is, and I forgot what the numbers were exactly, but essentially. When it comes to receivers anyway, you want them drafted at a pretty young age, 20, 21, in a perfect world. You don't want the receivers coming out of college and starting their rookie year at 22, 23, or, God forbid, 24. So he fulfills that, and just athletically, he's just a beast. I mean, all you had to do was watch his tape from Texas A&M and see, I mean, just at the point of attack and on the line of scrimmage, I mean, it was just ridiculous. Now, he's not going into quite as good a situation as Watkins, and by good situation, I mean he's not the number one target there. But I think you could make a case that overall that offense is certainly better than Buffalo. He does have Vincent Jackson to sort of battle with for targets because I still think Vincent Jackson's a pretty good value in Dynasty or redraft leagues. So, it's not like Evans is going to rack up 100 catches his first year. But, look, is he going to be an awesome deep threat, and is he going to catch a lot of touchdowns this year? Yeah, I think he probably could. And you're playing in the NFC South, not traditionally a hardcore defensive division. And you've got Josh McCown, who, look, I'm not saying Josh McCown's Pro Bowl caliber either, but, look, he's essentially stepping into the same situation he did last year in Chicago. You have two very tall, athletic receivers, and they just throw it up and see what happens. And, look, it worked out pretty well. So, with a guy like Evans, I think is pretty ready-made to contribute this year. And look, it's another one of those safe choices where if you don't want to think too much and you certainly don't want to outthink yourself, just go ahead and take Evans with the second pick and just be happy with it.
Yeah, Evans, he's a mistake eraser, man. Like him, just like Jackson, just like Seferian Jenkins. It's like their catching radius is so large that a quarterback can be inaccurate, and it just doesn't matter. It's kind of a strategy you saw it with the Bears when they got Jay Cutler. They said, all right, how big can we get a receiver? If you remember, they had the Earl Bennett, the Johnny Knoxes, the small Devin Hester, small shifty receiver. Jay Cutler and the front office, more than likely, were like, nah, this is a really bad idea. Got bigger, taller, wider at the receiver position. Even Martellus Bennett, who's 6'7". Like, these are all people that can go up and grab a football, and Tampa basically implemented that within their own offense. I will say early on, don't get frustrated with Evans if he's not the immediate impact player that maybe Watkins or someone else might be. Because I do think starting from day one, Vincent Jackson is option number one. In the run game and even in the pass game, Doug Martin is option number two. And depending on how Seferian Jenkins comes into training camp, he could be option number three. Like Evans could be more or less a specialist for the first 4 to 6 weeks of the year. But with that being said, once everything clicks for him, once the playbook clicks for him, once the chemistry clicks, it's going to come on, and it's going to come on quickly. Because there aren't many teams that have numerous corners at 6'2" or above that are athletic. So there's going to be a mismatch one way or another, either towards Jackson's side or to Evans' side. I imagine in his rookie year it'll be towards Evans' side. So, yeah, the upside there, though, is just insane. Watching him in college, anything you put around him was just snagged. Like Venus flytrap, snagged. It was so much fun to watch. I'm going to miss him.
Well, hey, if you draft him this year, then you won't have to miss out on that.
I know. It was just living in Texas, you get all the A&M games, and he's just there in your living room. Now I have to go hunt down Tampa Bay games. Ugh,
well,
ridiculous.
It could be worse.
No.
Anyway, you're on the clock with the third pick, by the way.
So for the third pick, we're talking just a straight PPR league, and this is what we're doing with the third pick. I'm taking Brandon Cooks. Another thing to watch with here is this is before training camp starts for all teams, so understand that really quick. But watch the reps that he gets reportedly within training camp, within practices, games, etc. If he's getting a ton of reps early in the backfield, slot, out wide, etc., I could justify taking him at number 2 instead of number 3 because I think he is someone that is dynamic with the ball in his hands, and if they're going to try to get the ball in his hands at every opportunity, he reminds me of a wide receiver version of Gio Bernard as far as impact in his first year. And athletically, he reminds me of Steve Smith, like the old school Steve Smith from Carolina. And that is tough because God himself is not as tough as Steve Smith, but the same kind of stature, explosiveness, quickness, yard after catch ability. The hands are great. And he's going to, bar none, even if you don't like Cooks at 3, you can't argue that his situation is not the best of any rookie that's going to be drafted this year. So for me personally, there's too much immediate return and too much long-term potential for Cooks not to take him number 3.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that. I mean, and like you said, it's quite possible he enters the best situation of anyone. I mean, he's going to probably the best offense. He's going to start right away. And look, I mean, with the exception of Kenny Stills, that's an aging offense, meaning Marcus Colston, as durable as he's been, is not going to last forever. I mean, guys are going to have to start retiring at some point. So, yeah, I really can't fault you for that. He could. I mean, now, given, do I think he's ever going to be a guy that, like, goes off for 1,500 yards in a year and 100 catches? No, because I think I think we can agree the focal point of that offense is Jimmy Graham, right there. That's how they create the mismatches that they do. So, whereas I think his ceiling is not as high as some of the other guys. I think his floor is definitely very, very high. I think you're going to get at least a good amount of production from him every year, for sure.
Agreed. And we probably disagree a little bit on the ceiling just because there are certain people within an offense, and everyone knows who they are on the offense, that they get plays drawn up for them. You'd be surprised how few players it is per team that had plays drawn up specifically to give them the football. Like on the Saints, like you talked about, there's only one other person on the Saints I can personally say right now with confidence they've drawn up plays for that specific person. They had plays drawn up to get X, Y, or Z receiver open on this play, but they don't really care who the receiver is. Brandon Cooks from day one is one of the first receivers they've had where they say, all right, here's the guy. What plays do we draw up for him specifically to get him open? And I think that, for me, is what's the most exciting.
Yeah, and just sort of to touch on that point a little more, they did trade up for him. I mean, in the first round. I mean, this is the first time they've drafted a receiver in the first round since, I believe, the Robert Meacham era. Yeah, I know. It's a sore spot. So, I think there's a lot to like. And, look, depending on your need, I can't really – I mean, look, I'll get into this in the next pick, but, unless you're just desperate for something at another position, I don't think you can go wrong with Cooks at that spot.
Okay, well, don't tease me then. Like, what's going in the next pick? Segue. What's your pick for?
That's why I was doing it. I would, I'd probably go Ebron at 4. And this is sort of where it starts getting dicey, because I think you can make a case that those top 3 picks are pretty solid, right?
Yep.
Like, there's not much deviation from there. I mean, depending on need. But even then, and again, we can cover this a little later. It's not like any of the running backs are like surefire things to start or be the head guy like last year. I mean, last year I think people got really lucky / spoiled with their Eddie Lacy's and their Le'Veon Bells and their Gio Bernards. Yeah. Like right off the bat. I mean, you knew those guys were going to be the guys. Well, you don't have that this year. I mean, the only guy that is going to start potentially from day one is Sankey, which even then there's questions on how good is he, right? Like, it's not like consensus that, no, he's going to be very good. I mean, there's just not. So, for a league, and this goes for Dynasty, the actual NFL, whatever, tight end is just becoming too important to not have some kind of, not elite necessarily player, but somebody good there. Otherwise you got to make it up in a lot of different positions. So, for me it's Ebron. I mean, you made this point a couple weeks ago that I think is a very valid point, which is, look, they re-signed Pettigrew to like a 4-year deal. Now, Pettigrew has not done anything with that position, and they've given him every opportunity. They finally realized, okay, the only thing this guy can do is block. Great. So they re-signed him to do that. They had Joseph Fourier, who, look, created, a little bit of a little bit of excitement last year. He did develop into a minor red zone threat, but I don't think they saw him as the guy like, oh no, this is the guy we're going to roll with for, the next couple years. So to draft a guy 10th overall in a very loaded draft, this was not a weak draft by any means, I think says something. And like I told you the other day, he's the highest drafted tight end since Vernon Davis. And that was 8 years ago, maybe more, So I think there's a lot to like. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's not a sure thing like the other 3 guys. He does have, I think, an above average drop rate for compared to the other tight ends of this rookie class. But I don't think you can deny, just the skill set that he has. I mean, just the way he can get the point of attack and just his overall game, I think, can't be ignored. And especially going to that offense when they're going to throw it. And look, they've got an offensive coordinator now, Joe Lombardi, who, surprise, he was in New Orleans last year as their quarterbacks coach. So, it wouldn't surprise me if Ebron went off this year. It really wouldn't. And, I think especially if you're looking or you're a little weaker in the tight end position, I think grabbing Ebron is a pretty good choice there.
Agreed. I will say, if you want to take, and is it for the record, is it Ebron or Eberon? Do we know yet?
I think it's whatever you feel like.
Awesome. Qatar or Qatar. Great. So, the argument for Eric Ebron being in the first three picks, anywhere one, two, or three, I think can be made, and it's strictly on the point that you said that the scarcity of a position, when you have an elite player at a position like tight end, where there is just a like for me anyway, when healthy, it's Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, and then just a whole bunch of shit. Like it drops off after those two.
Not Jason Witten, not Vernon Davis.
No, I mean Vernon Davis. So look, no, because they don't get targets like these other guys do. Vernon Davis had a career high in touchdowns, and that's awesome. I'm not projecting touchdowns for anyone, especially a tight end like Vernon Davis, who's 6'1.5".
Sure,
Like
I get
that's
that.
not happening for me. And Witten's old, so and I love him by the way, but he's old. So when it comes to these things, like the Patriots and Saints have built an offense around those tight ends. If you believe Ebron is someone they will build an offense around in the future, and you think he can put up elite numbers, which man, I like you could talk me into it, but I can't really do that for a tight end again that's 6'2". It's really hard for me to do that. But if you think that, if you truly believe that, then take him in the first three picks because the positional value of having an elite tight end, hot sports take warning, but it's so much more valuable than having an awesome receiver than Watkins or Evans, who receivers, even though those guys are amazing, will come year after year in the draft. Like we don't have tight ends drafted in the top 10 based on physical abilities every year. This happens once every 5 years or so. It's kind of rare. So if he really is as good as his draft position, you could talk me into him instead of Cooks or Evans or even Watkins at 1 overall.
Interesting. That is a hot sports take.
Hot sports take. Hashtag hot sports take. But yeah, I mean, tight ends are going to be sexy to people because they just don't exist in fantasy more than any other position. So I would get it. But I'm not saying I would do it, but I would get it.
Right. All right, that was 4. So who do you got for 5?
All right. So, I mean, is this the point of the draft where we go with who we think will be the 5th best person in 5 years from now, or who is going to take 5th?
Yeah, this is based on. This is not with any prior notions of team or whatever. This is just your big board essentially of who you got.
Man, I really hope no one in our other leagues are listening to this. All right, so you know what's coming. At 5th overall, if I had a draft and I had the 5th pick and these 4 were gone, I would take Marquise Lee from Jacksonville.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So I mean, look, man. So let's have a real conversation real quick.
Yeah,
right?
let's have a real conversation. Let's have it.
Okay. So is Bishop Sankey any good?
Wow, this is a super hot sports take.
I know. Is Bishop Sankey any good?
This is white hot.
No, it's not. Come on.
All right, continue. Sorry.
So is Bishop Sankey any good? Is he any good at all?
I think for me, at best, he's going to be a part of a thunder and lightning type combo. And if he can be good at that, then I think he's got a chance.
Awesome. So a guy that gets 170 carries a year, pass. Is Marquise Lee better than Odell Beckham Jr.? And here's the thing.
I would personally, and I'm not a fan of either, but if those are my choices, I would take Beckham. I really would.
So if you do that, you're projecting onto Beckham. You're not basing that off of anything else than what you think he's going to do, because he's never produced in college. He's going to essentially the exact same offense in the pros with a struggling quarterback, whereas Marquise Lee, as of 2 years ago, was a prospect viewed ahead of someone like Sammy Watkins and Mike Evans, with a struggling quarterback, by the way, and a struggling program at USC. The only issue with Marquise Lee is the reason his numbers were down across the board were injuries, and I have to grant that. He's 6 foot, maybe 190 or 200 on a good day. He's a smaller guy, and that's fine. I get that. But I would just beg people, please, don't look at his tape from last year. Don't look at his numbers from last year. Go to the year before. Last year, his coach got fired on a bus ride back in the middle of the season at 2:30 at night. That program was stupid. They were in shambles. The quarterback wasn't any good, and he still put up 1,100 yards in the most dysfunctional year of a program that we've seen in the last 10 years. Like, the kid to me, like, you don't, unless he murdered somebody, which he didn't, you don't have that kind of talent and lose it for a year, and
Which
then
some
everyone's
NFLers have. I mean, that is a concern.
yeah, I mean that's why I put that that caveat's there.
Right.
But
Right.
I think this kid, we're gonna look back a few years from now and think, wow, that 1 year where he wasn't good, despite the fact he was a top 5 recruit in the nation, he was a top 5 receiver in the nation in college until he got hurt a little bit, and now he's a top 5 receiver in the NFL. Like, his kind of talent projects every level he goes to. So I don't know. Maybe and I don't love anybody else. Jeremy Hill split time. Carlos Hyde split time for a while, maybe. Bishop Sankey, I think, may not be any good. And Odell Beckham Jr. is someone that has never produced at a prolific rate in college, is going to an offense that is in transition with an aging quarterback. And Kelvin Benjamin, no thanks. Like, no. So
Well, that's
it's
fair.
a gut, and I think Lee ends up better than anyone else.
Wow. Hot sports take. Hot sports take.
Well, let me ask you, so the converse of this, what are you worried about with Lee that you're not worried about with everyone else?
Chad Henne's throwing him the ball.
That's fine, but so you're talking about a guy for a year. Do you really think Chad Henne is coming back next year?
That, and it concerns me. And look, you bring up very good points with his season last year, but I'm just trying to think of a guy that dropped off from year to year, but then was back on the upswing in the NFL. I mean, that's just typically, I'm not saying it's not possible, I'm just saying that's not the typical trajectory of guys in the NFL. It's just not. So, look, I get what you're saying, and believe me, it would be a completely different conversation if this were last year and he came out in the draft, but it wasn't. And yeah, he went through a lot of shit last year, but I don't know, man. It just believe me, I hope I'm wrong for your sake, because I know how infatuated you are. But it's just, yeah.
Well, I guess for me, it's just like if we had that extra year of time to look at someone and say, all right, well, after his sophomore year was awesome and his junior year he sucked. If he sucked because he was dropping the football or was no longer getting separation or whatever it was, then all right, it's a red flag. Marquise Lee, when he was healthy and not banged up throughout the year, was still separating, still catching the football, still making plays. Like, the physical talent that was there never left him, which is why that's the reason I'm still incredibly high on him. I also think he's a victim of circumstance. He came into he ended up going into one of the most loaded draft classes at a skill position that we've seen in quite a while. So it's unfortunate, but I mean, if we're talking about positional players that are thought of very highly and then don't get drafted until later, like, at that point you can't draft Safarius Jenkins. He was a top 10 pick this year and then fell off, and now he got drafted in the second round. So he sucks, apparently.
I agree with that.
Oh, come on! At least you're consistent. Whatever.
Anyway, all right. So we'll move on from the Marquise Lee at 5 pick. Wow. At 6, God, and I hate to keep making this guy keep dropping, but the obvious choice, I'm not taking him. You know me, I'm a big Jordan Matthews fan. That's who I'm taking. That's who I would take at 6. All the reports are good out of camp so far. And to your point, his production was very good in college. I mean, he's the SEC leader in catches and receiving yards. So he also produces. He's going to an offense that, could be very, very good for a little bit. And, and we talked about this before. I don't think Macklin's there next year because, A, if he has a good season, he's going to cash in somewhere else. B, if he has a bad season, they're not going to bring him back. And that elevates Matthews, I think, to one of the starting roles there. I think he at least starts in the slot this year. Now, he's going to have to fight for targets between himself and guys like Ertz and Cooper. But to me, I mean, he's entering a very good situation too, and he's got all the tools for it. So if I'm at 6 and these are my options, that's who I'm going with.
This is probably the safest pick you could make. And I don't mean that in a complimentary way. From like pick 6 on in the first round. So I would ask you, like, and where do you think the majority of big plays in a Chip Kelly offense come from?
Oh, the deep ball.
No, not at all. From the screen game, from running backs and bubble screens. So I will say this: in a PPR league, Jordan Matthews makes some sense, okay? Because he basically got all of his stats at Vandy from just running bubble screen. That's all they did. Like he never really went deep. He broke tackles and went 60 yards by breaking 4 tackles and good blocking downfield. So schematically, he's in a good situation. He's never going to be someone that stretches the field ever. He's not fast enough. He's a big guy, so he's not going to get jammed to the line too often. And he's in a coaching situation that they'll be creative enough with him to get him the football in certain situations. I don't know that he's the kind of guy, I don't know that he ever has a 1,000-yard season, to be honest, because he seems to me, like you said, in his first year, he's going to be basically the same thing as Riley Cooper. Like, if I'm taking, man, unless I underrate Riley Cooper a bit, like, he should be better than Riley Cooper from day one. And if he is,
he should be.
Great. But they kind of seem like Chip Kelly values wide receivers that can block in the run game, block in the screen game. They don't have to get downfield, really. Deshaun Jackson being the obvious exception here. But the first chance he got, he traded his ass out because he didn't fit schematically what he wanted to do. So, I mean, he wants receivers that will work intermediate routes, bubble screens, block in the run game, block in the pass game. The explosion comes from running backs, hello, LaShawn McCoy, and tight ends, hello, Zach Ertz. So that's my spiel. I think he'll be solid, but I don't think there's a whole lot of upside there.
Okay. And I think the point's made that, he's another one of those guys for me, well, I think is what you're saying, that's like Cooks in that he might not have the highest ceiling, but he's got a pretty high floor only because they're going to throw it, they're going to make a lot of plays, and they're going to run a lot of plays too. I mean, that's just the nature of Chip Kelly's offense. And with how well it did last year, it's not like he's going away anytime soon. So
he's going to get cheap points in a PPR league because he's going to get 2 or 3 catches a game just because of bubble screens. And then, there's nothing worse than looking down at your roster at your third receiver and seeing 0 points because they never threw him the football. That won't be an issue with Jordan Matthews.
I don't think so. And I think, at least this year anyway, I think with him and Ertz, that's going to be a pretty lethal red zone combo that they're going to be able to employ there, along with, obviously, LaShawn McCoy. I'm not counting Darren Sproles for obvious reasons because I hate him with a passion. But anyway, so that would be my pick. And, like you said, I think it's a safe pick. I'm just taking it more positively, I think, than you are.
That's fair.
Hello.
So, hey, say hi to the wife. She's on national YouTube TV.
Hello.
Now people
What?
So now people can identify you by your voice. People know who you are now. I can't hide you anymore.
True.
All right, so I'm at 7, right? So
yes.
He's going to get taken way earlier than this, way sooner.
Oh, thank
7,
God. Thank God.
You got to go Sankey here, okay? He is the one running back in the first year that is going to have the chance to be the guy, all right? Unless you're believing like Terrence West is beating out Ben Tate or whatever other bullshit you want to hear out of Cleveland, like he is going to be the guy from day one. He can work in the passing game. He's good out of the backfield. He can take the ball and run with it between the tackles a little bit and even on the edges, okay? I don't think he's that good. I don't know that he's very good at all. I think he has a lot of talent within holes, finding space, and he's got very good. He's the anti-Trent Richardson, okay? He can get going from 0 to 60 like that. His 60 isn't very fast, but he gets up in his acceleration, and his jump cut ability and his agility is great. He's a smaller guy. He's not going to run over people, and he's not a 4-3 guy either. But he can make people miss. If you draft Sankey and he's one of your guys, and he happens to go for like 250 carries and 1,300 or 1,200 yards rushing and like 8 TDs, awesome. Trade him immediately. Get as many draft picks for him as you can.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't. He's one of those. It's a classic case of I think you're going to hear a lot of good reports out of training camp because look, it's a lot of padless practice. Like look, he like you said, he can get very fast very quickly, and he's very athletic. But it's just, you would have thought he would have looked like a more complete back out of Washington, right? Like you would have thought he would have been able to do more. I mean, yes, he ran fast and he was able to get to the edge and all that. That's great. But to be a three-down guy in the NFL, you got to go between the tackles at some point. And I don't know that Sankey has that. I don't know that he can stand up to that. I really don't. It was a very, weird offense he played in last year in Washington. Not good quarterback play, so they relied on him a lot. So, given he did very well, but I don't know. I have my doubts about a running back running wild in the Pac-12, and that translating, to the NFL, I guess, if that makes sense. I mean, look, are there examples of that? Yeah, but they're pretty few and far between as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you could say Steven Jackson was a good Pac-12 guy, but look, Steven Jackson could run between the tackles and hurt people.
Yeah.
Right? Maurice Jones-Drew out of UCLA. Again, I think he was, but again, that was a guy that could run between the tackles and take a hit, and he could take a pounding, and he did. I don't know that Sankey's that guy, and his situation is not the best for me either. I mean, look, it's like we talked about. The guys last year, the running backs drafted at the top of the draft last year, Bell, Lacey, Bernard, look, even Ball, if you want to make a case for him, they all had good quarterback play helping them out, right?
Yeah.
That could sort of help them along the way, because there's going to be growing pains. No one is like going to shoot out of the gate and be perfect. But for those first couple of weeks or that first half season, it's really important to have a good quarterback you can rely on to sort of essentially save your butt first time you screw something up. And Sankey doesn't have that. He's got Jake Locker. I'm sorry. It's not happening with Jake Locker. It's not, okay? And truthfully, Jake Locker's not going to be there next year, okay? If you had a pool for team most likely to draft a quarterback next year, I would take the Tennessee Titans all day, okay? Because Ken Wisenhunt is not going to put up with that.
Correct.
So I think it's a team in transition, and typically what that means is, look, is he a Wisenhunt guy? Was he drafted by Wisenhunt? Yeah, he was. But I can't believe they're going to roll with Sankey as their featured guy this year, let alone for multiple years. So, look, to your point, if you need a guy now, then great. Sankey's definitely your guy. But, if you can afford to wait, or if you can stash him, maybe put him on your taxi squad, this is not your guy by any means.
I will say, the one thing going for him, you'll see a lot of Bernard comparisons, and they're similarly statistically built. Like, they're both around 5'9", 5'10", both around 210, 215 pounds. He did average 11 yards a catch out of the backfield last year with 30 catches almost. So they don't have to take him off the field in third down. But I'm with you. Pretty much across the board, I'm with you.
Yeah, well, it's not a knock against him. I think if he were in, if he were like a Darren Sproles type in the Saints offense, I think he'd be awesome. Like, he would do really well with something like that. But with what they're asking him to do, I just can't believe he's gonna last, quite honestly. So, anyway, all right, that was the 7th pick. So now we have 8th pick. Ooh, now it's getting dicey. Ooh. I would probably continue this trend, and I'd probably take Hyde here. I'm sort of with you on the receiver front. I don't see another receiver anyway that I just think is going to be great. And I think Hyde is probably the best back. I mean, just if you look at the player themselves of this rookie class. So, his situation, I think it's going to end up being really good, quite honestly. I mean, I love Frank Gore. You and I are both 49er fans, but I really truthfully believe Frank Gore is on the down. He's on the downhill, but I don't know that he lasts much longer as an effective back. I really don't. He averaged 3.5 yards per carry in the last half of last season, so it's already sort of starting. And look, Marcus Lattimore is not all the way back. And I just think there's a great opportunity if Hyde were to come on and he were able to show that he can move the chains pretty early. Look, Harbaugh, luckily, he's a hot hand guy. I mean, if you don't believe it, just look at Colin Kaepernick. So he's going to go with the guy that is on a streak right there. And look, the only reason they stuck with Frank Gore last year, quite honestly, in that feature back, they didn't have anyone else to give it, 20 times a game. They really didn't. They were kind of stuck with that. So I think, if Hyde were on that team last year and Gore started slipping, I think you'd see a lot more Hyde, which I think is probably what's going to end up happening this year. So, look, in a perfect world, if you've got a deep roster or a stash, or you've got a taxi squad availability, I think Hyde is like the best player for that of like any player in this draft.
I've come around on him a little bit more than I did in the beginning because you have reports out of camp already that Lattimore is not ready to start camp. He's got hamstring and knee issues. Kendall Hunter, obviously, although I think Kendall Hunter's a good player, he's not long for that team. Well, Michael James might be dead in an alley somewhere. We don't know. There's obviously, like you said, there's nobody behind Gore. If Carlos Hyde, who was built, like you mentioned Steven Jackson earlier, and you said that name earlier, and that's what I think Carlos Hyde reminds me of, is Steven Jackson kind of thing. Big, huge, punishing guy who can make people miss, but can also run right the F over you. He's going to be a fun guy to watch. I don't know how much opportunity there is there in the first year. And, I mean, listen, 10% chance maybe, but if Lattimore ever gets fully healthy, he's better than Carlos Hyde. I think we can probably rule that out at this point, but nobody knows. We haven't seen the guy do anything for 2 years. So it's a decent gamble. I don't mind it. He's the one guy on there that I think has a chance to be the bell cow for a running offense over the next 5 years out of all the running backs that we talked about, that we have talked about and are going to talk about. So it doesn't bother me. There's a lot of upside there going into the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Very good. All right, that was the 8th pick, so you were on the clock for the 9th pick.
Can I draft Marquise Lee again? No?
It's probably more appropriate at 9 than 5, but no, you cannot. So
if I'm looking at 9, it's between two people for me. Jeez. I would go Odell Beckham. Sorry, I'm going ODB. The talent is there. He's a good physical receiver. I think his ceiling is a high-end number 2. There's a lot of trepidation with this pick for me because maybe I'm in the minority here, but I think he's going into the worst situation of any receiver that was drafted in the first round. That includes Kelvin Benjamin. Odell Beckham Jr. is not the best receiver on his team, yet somehow going to an awful offense where the quarterback might be done. And it's a brand new offensive coordinator, brand new offensive system, in a division where they're kind of a crapshoot of a division. I mean, the one thing about it is there's no defense in that division. He could pick it up early, but if you need a receiver and you're at 9 or 10 in this draft and he's available, you can. He's one of those. He's sort of like Tiki Barber back in redrafts in the early thousands. You always ended up with him at the end of the first round, and you never felt good about it, and you ended up doing okay anyway. Same kind of thing here. Like, you're going to take him. You're not going to feel great about it, but he'll probably end up being okay.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't see Ruben Randall long for New York. I mean, I have yet to see a positive report on Ruben Randall out of Giants camp at any year. So, and look, they drafted him pretty high. They drafted him 12th overall when they had a lot of holes. It wasn't like, this was a team that was one player away. They had a lot of holes to fill. So they obviously liked what he can do or what he can bring anyway. But I'm with you as to whether they utilize that or are able to utilize that. I don't know, because I think that whole offense is pinned on Manning, and if he's gone, then he's gone. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a little bit before they get somebody, I think, that can replace that kind of production, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that was 9. I would probably take Benjamin here.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like okay. he's already the number one receiver on that team. Can we agree with that?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And given that's not to say it's because of his all-world talent, but it's just because Jericho Cotchery and Jason Avant are the guys behind him. So it's not like he's got a lot of competition there. But I think just obviously he's a big dude. I mean, he's borderline tight end, and I think hopefully they can figure out a way for Cam Newton to just throw it up to him and come down with it. And look, they have Greg Olsen, I think, who's always been and always probably will be Cam Newton's safety valve. But I'm hoping that if they can establish the run like they did last year, that there's going to be opportunities for them, I think, when they're in the red zone to lob it up to Benjamin. I think he can win that battle. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, it's an offense that's not. It's not an old offense. It's not an offense on the downswing. They've got Cam Newton, who you could argue is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the NFL or Dynasty or any other fantasy league. And he's lacked a tall, physical receiver his entire career. So I think there's a lot of possibility there with Benjamin. Now, it's by no means a sure thing. By no means. I mean, Benjamin is super raw, and he had exactly 1 year of production, which, again, the track record on that is never good either, to have only 1 good year of college production. And he's already 24, I think, which, again, goes back to that paradigm of, hey, no receivers under or over 22. So, look, it's not like there's certainly stuff going against Benjamin, and it certainly is preventing him from going to the top half of rookie drafts, but look, at number 10, I think you could get a potential starter out of that. I really do.
So, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything. There's a caveat. He is 23, but it's still old for a receiver who hasn't played a lot and didn't play a lot in college, to be honest. I mean,
right.
You're hoping, and this is more of an ignorant thing on my side, maybe this is an article I take on in the future about how different coaching staffs will affect different players. I don't know what the track record of the offensive and wide receiving coaching staff of the Panthers is as far as how they've developed people in the past. But Kelvin Benjamin caught 84 passes his entire career in college. That's not a lot.
There's a lot. Look, there's a lot of tread on those tires. That's how you got to view that.
I mean, Jordan Matthews caught 94 alone his junior year. And there's just so much questionable outcomes for him that it would be he could be Alshon Jeffrey or he could be Mike Williams. I just have no clue. I have none. And if you want to gamble on he's the number one receiver from day one. Even if he sucks, they're going to play him because they have to. So there's a built-in safety net there. So if you take him at the end of the first, that's fine. If someone gambles on him at like 5 or 6, have at it. I want no part of that.
Yeah, I agree. First half of the draft, there's just too many good players. But look, if you start getting towards the end of your draft, your first round, look, I think you can do worse than Benjamin. I really do. So, all right, that's 10. Who you got for 11?
Well, this is where it gets a little bit thin as far as you're looking at backups for the most part. I know people are probably shouting about Amaro in New York, and I'm not doing that. Sorry. A guy at this point, if I'm at the end of the first draft, beginning of the second round draft, it's assuming that I have really a very good team because I won either won your Super Bowl or whatever you want to call it, your championship of your league, or you were in the last 2 or 3. So you can sort of bet on talent a little bit. At 11, I would take Jeremy Hill of Cincinnati. To be honest, I really would. I think him and Hyde would probably fight for the most talented overall package of running back in the draft. Now, I'll say this is a joke, but it's actually kind of a good situation for him. He is someone that comes with a lot of personal issues off the field. He's not exactly a clean character case, but he's going to a place in Cincinnati. Juju when it comes to rehabilitating people and making them functional members of society, and it needs to be credited within that organization that they have the ability to do that. And so you would make the joke that he's going to this team full of convicts, ha ha ha. Well, the thing about it is, once you get to Cincy, you don't really get into trouble. They kind of keep you on a straight and narrow, and that'll be good for Jeremy Hill because he's a guy that, man, his talent, he is a huge, huge man who is really thin through the hole. He's 6'1", 235, but nimble, can get through a hole, can tiptoe. Not going to run past everybody per se. He can get caught in the open field, but he can make someone miss and bust off 10, 15, 20 yards. He sort of reminds me of an Alfred Morris, only on steroids. And if he was going, like, for example, if Jeremy Hill got drafted by Tennessee, he would be, to me, the number one pick, no questions asked. None whatsoever. But he's not. He's going to a place where Gio Bernard already exists, and I don't know what the workload there is going to be. So,
yeah, no, I'm good with that. Quite honestly, I think he's more on the side of if you're looking for immediate impact. Obviously, I mean, there's already reports of him passing Ben Jarvis Greenell's on the depth chart like from the get-go. So. And I just looked last year. Greenell still had 220 carries, even though he had a 3.4 yards per carry. So, I think a guy like Hill, and I agree with you, I think Hill could have challenged for top running back just based on skill and talent. Like you alluded to, had some problems at LSU, but granted, who hasn't had problems at LSU, quite honestly? But yeah, I think he could be a decent running back for someone. Look, if you have a league that has, that goes 3 running backs or a flex or something, I think Hill could be a decent option on that. I really do. And look, you always have the possibility that a guy like Bernard, who, is very athletic, very nimble, but could get hurt because he does a lot of things, and then Hill's going to be the guy. He's going to be that 3-down guy if that should happen. So yeah, I don't see a problem with that, especially at this point in the draft. I think, running backs are proving to be, while they're the most replaceable, meaning, they change every year, that also means that there's a select few that are consistent that, if you have them, then it's like gold, right? Like you don't want to let them go. So, for a guy like Hill, I think he's one of those guys. He's not a guy that's like gold, but could you have him for the next 3 or 4 years on a good Cincinnati offense, and he could get up maybe 800 yards, maybe 10 touchdowns rushing, just because he's the goal line back? Yeah, I think you probably could. So, and yeah, if you're drafting this late in the draft or this late in the round, then I don't see a problem with that. I really don't.
Really quick, how much do you think he averaged yards per carry last year playing in the SEC?
6.
6.9.
There you go.
He averaged almost 7 yards a carry on 200 carries. It wasn't like he was a specialist. Like that guy, his long was a 69-yard carry last year. Like he can move. And, man, on talent alone, he's intriguing.
No, I agree. I think, I think there's a lot to like. So, all right. So last pick of the round, and we'll do, I think, round 2, not tonight, but at a later podcast. But I'm hoping you forget who I'm deciding between. Because for me right now, it's probably between a guy like Amaro and a guy like Freeman from Atlanta, who I'm a big Freeman homer. So,
I know.
Oh. And here's the funny thing. I was super high on Amaro, and I know you know this.
I know.
But it just hasn't looked good. None of the reports have been good. I mean, it's sort of like, yeah, he's just lost out there. Which, granted, he went from the, no huddle spread offense of Texas Tech, where it was essentially, hey, Jace, go line up wide and just go out, right? That's literally what they did. And he did it very well. But no matter what offense you're in the NFL, it's going to be more complex than that, no matter who you go to. And he's not picking it up right now. Now, given the track record for tight ends in their rookie year is never good. It has never been good. It might not ever be good. But it's a little disconcerting, especially when you consider, and this is kind of related, a guy like Tavon Austin, who this year admitted last year the playbook looked like Spanish to him. Well, holy crap, we all saw what that did to him. So, I can only imagine what's going to do to a guy like Amaro. So, I would probably go Freeman here, which is probably a bit high, but it's one of those things, like you said, if you're picking towards the end of this round, most likely you did pretty well this year, so you have good players on your team and maybe don't need an immediate need filled. Freeman is going to be a guy who you could theoretically stash, but also could contribute right away. It's really going to depend on Steven Jackson and how much he has left in the tank, because there's no doubt he's very effective, but he's getting up there in age too. I mean, you think he's 30 now too, 30 or 31, and he doesn't have a lot of time left. And look, I think a guy like Freeman is already ahead of a guy like Jaquiz Rogers there. I mean, Jaquiz Rogers has had 3 to 4 years to take that job and just hasn't. So they drafted Freeman, I think in the third round. He's set up to be the featured guy pretty quickly. And even before then, I think he's going to do some things, especially on third down and probably, obvious passing downs, where he'll contribute some. So for me, that would be it. Again, ideally, I would stash him on my taxi squad and just let him sit there for a year. But I like his chances of contributing both short-term and long-term over a guy like Amaro, I think.
Okay. That's fair. Into transition, roughly, into if you're in an IDP league with defensive players, for me, there's only really 2 players I think that are worth a first round, and really only one, if I'm being honest. If someone takes Mosley at the end of the first, okay, that's fine, I get it. I don't think he's special by any stretch of the imagination, but he's going to play, and he's going to rack up meaningless tackles. You're not going to get a lot of impact plays out of him. But depending on how he's listed in your league, if he is listed as a defensive end or a defensive lineman, Jadeveon Clowney in the first round makes all the sense in the world to me. And especially, I know it sounds converse to logic, but if they get the extension done for J.J. Watt and he signs a long-term deal there in Houston before your draft happens, go get Clowney. Because that means both of them are playing together for at least 5 years, and J.J. Watt is an absolute freak of nature. And no different in the same way that Clowney is. And one of them on every single play is going to be single-teamed and is going to crush somebody. And it's sort of like tight ends with defensive linemen. The dearth of impactful defensive linemen is kind of insane. And if you can find an elite guy that puts up points on the regular every game just by being him, that's a guy worth taking around, I would say, 7, 8, or even a little bit later than that.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. I don't know. I know you're hoping beyond hope he sticks a defensive line, but everything I've seen has said they're going linebacker with him, and it's not even a question. So, but even then, I think he could be a good player. I think he's going to rack up a lot of sacks because look, he's going to have his finger in the dirt even if he is a linebacker. So
yeah, he's just not a first rounder at that point. He's somebody you look at the second, third.
Sure. So yeah, a guy like that's going to be good. A guy like Mosley for me, either Mosley or Shazier, really. I think those two are going to be very good very early. And, I think a sweet spot for them would probably be early second, because that's assuming you got a guy in the first on offense that you could either, stash with a lot of upside or contribute right away. And then you can go straight into a linebacker who, between Mosley and Shazier, I think they're going to be, like you said, they're going to rack up a lot of tackles for sure. But I think especially a guy like Shazier, I think he has a chance to do a lot of other things too. Pass deflections, forced fumbles, sacks, all of the above. So, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely targeting one of those 2 guys in my early second. I'll just let everyone know that right now. So,
fair enough.
But anyway, all right, I think that covered it. Like I said, I think we'll do round 2 at our next podcast. But in the meantime, be sure to go to dynastyfantasyfootballcentral.com, and you can always follow us on Twitter at dynasty_FFC. Jonathan, do you have anything else? Any parting words?
No, that's it. Just don't overthink it, people. Don't overthink it at all.
I think that's probably very sage advice. So until next time.